Supposedly, the Cold War begins after this war, World War II. However, judging by events, the Cold War begins just before Christmas 1944 in Greece, and it isn't very cold. It's fought with hot bullets and steaming death. I'm Spartacus Olsson. This is War Against Humanity, a series of World War II in real time. As the German forces prepared to withdraw from Greece in the late summer and autumn of 1944, a swirling cauldron of forces battled for domination of this ancient land. Resistance fights resistance, resistance fights the German, and the resistance fights the British. On all sides there is mistrust, fear, and hatred born of ideological fanaticism and the intersection of communism, nationalism, and imperialism. When the Germans leave the country, that fear and hatred boils over and Greece looks set for civil war. But all of this is just one of the first clashes of a larger civilizational conflict that will eventually consume the globe. It is in Greece, in December 1944, that Winston Churchill and the British forces in Athens fire some of the first shots of the new Cold War. In the summer of 1944, as the British look to the future, Greece is paramount among all the countries in Central Europe and the Balkans. As German forces prepare to withdraw from the country in August 1944, Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden writes a memo. If we are to maintain any political influence in Southeast Europe, and above all our strategic position in the Eastern Mediterranean after the war, it is essential that Greece should be ruled by a government friendly to us. For some time now, the British have had a friendly government ready to install once liberation is complete. That would be the government in exile under Georgios Papandreou. But as we've seen before on this channel, the resistance fighters on the ground have their own ideas about how things should be run. Just to remind you of the two main resistance groups here. First, we have the National Liberation Front, EAM, and its military wing, the Greek People's Liberation Army, or ELAS. EAM is a loose coalition of leftist Republican factions, but is dominated by the communists. Because of this, Britain has been reluctant to provide more than limited support to ELAS. On the other side, we have the smaller National Republican Greek League, or EDES. EDES is both anti-fascist and anti-communist, and is aligned with the British. They have received significant support from London and Cairo. For their part, even though ELAS are dominated by the communists, they don't have a great deal of support from Moscow. Part of that is down to ideological and strategic differences between ELAS and Moscow, but also thanks to an understanding between Churchill and Stalin. You see, the British Prime Minister spends the summer corresponding with Stalin over the future spheres of influence in Central Europe and the Balkans. Those discussions culminate in October this year at the Moscow conference when Stalin agrees to British domination in Greece in return for Soviets receiving Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. But back to summer 1944, and even without Soviet support, ELAS is by far the most powerful force on the ground in Greece, other than the Germans, of course, and counts about 50,000 fighters. They made both military and political attempts to assert their dominance. Back in October 1943, ELAS launched a major attack on EDES, and it was only after the intervention of the British military mission that the two groups signed in an uneasy truce in February 1944. Truce aside, EAM and ELA's ambitions remained unchecked. In April, EAM announced the formation of the Political Committee of National Liberation, PEA, stating that it would take control of all areas of Greece already freed by the resistance. PEA even managed to ferment a revolt among the Greek navy in Cairo. Then, in April 1944, ELAS wiped out a third resistance group, a small organization aligned with EDES called National and Social Liberation, or ECA. Now, the British are worried that ELAS will exploit any security vacuum that emerges after the German withdrawal. They also want to have a contingency plan in case Stalin reneges on his promises. Eden therefore suggests in his memo that Britain should send a military force to maintain law and order in Greece after German withdrawal. The War Cabinet agrees and starts drawing up plans to dispatch a force under General Ronald Scobie. But before the British can flex their muscles and pick a fight in Greece, they need both ELAS and EDES to work together to interdict German troops from exiting the Balkans. Two German army groups, Army Group E and F, are spread across Greece, Albania, and Yugoslavia. The Allies want to prevent them from joining the fight elsewhere. The plan is that SOE, OSS, and the various resistance groups cut the rail lines running through the three countries and hammer German troops as they move by road. The Greek part of the plan, Operation Noah's Ark, will not work unless EDES and ELAS bury the hatchet for now. Back in May, at the Lebanon Conference, the British brought together the Greek government in exile, which wants the return of King George, representatives of pre-war political parties, and delegates from ELAS, EDES, and what remains of ECA. The various parties reached an agreement to set up a coalition government that will have supreme command of all resistance forces. But EM only got 5 out of 15 delegates on the coalition government, and any questions about the future of the monarchy were brushed aside. EM then tried to hold the agreement to ransom, demanding the resignation of Papandreou. That debate rumbles on through the summer, and in a furious letter to Eden on August 6th, Churchill presents a binary choice: war with EM, ELAS, or the abandonment of Greece to communism. The behavior of EM is absolutely intolerable. Obviously, they are seeking nothing but the communization of Greece during the confusion of war, without allowing the people to decide in any matter understood by democracy. Should matters go downhill and EM become master, we should have to reconsider keeping any of our mission there and put the Greek people bluntly up against Bolshevism. The case seems to me to have reached the following point: either we support Papandreou, if necessary with force as we have agreed, or we disinterest ourselves utterly in Greece. But EM caves to British pressure and joins the Greek government on August 18th. Key to this turnaround is lack of support from Stalin, who has no interest in jeopardizing relations with the Western Allies by fostering revolutions in their sphere of influence. Much like when Stalin simultaneously abandons the powerful communist resistance in France, ordering them to submit to de Gaulle. But despite all the efforts towards a rapprochement between EDES and ELAS, Operation Noah's Ark never really gets off the ground properly. After 3 years of violence and economic crisis and some 300,000 to 600,000 people dead of starvation, the end is almost in sight for Greece. An end that might mean that you have survived, and German massacres during anti-partisan sweeps as recently as September are reminders of the risks in taking part in the operation. An operation that arguably serves only the Allied powers fighting in Western and Central Europe. Montague Woodhouse of the British military mission in Greece will later write, "There were obviously a lot of Greeks in the resistance who were tired of the whole business of occupation, not surprisingly, who were only anxious to see the Germans out of their country and who didn't see any good reason why they should delay them going." Once the operation starts, it's a guerrilla war and hard to definitely assess. Brigadier Eddie Myers, an SOE man who will later write as a historian of Greece, estimates 100 locomotives and 500 vehicles destroyed or captured and about 5,000 Germans killed. That may sound like some success, but the British assess the operation has little effect and little Greek support. SOE Major Ken Scott concludes, "What in effect happened in the end was that we, the British, blew a few bridges, organized the ambushing of convoys, but without much Greek support." There's also the issue that all parties are more concerned with who will dominate post-war Greece than with the German withdrawal. The British military mission in Greece may be enthusiastic about Noah's Ark, but at Downing Street, a smooth transition from German rule to British supervision is the main issue. The goal is to close the window for ELAS or Yugoslav partisan leader Josip Tito or Stalin to make inroads. As Indy has already covered, in August the British allowed the Germans to ferry troops out of the Aegean Islands unmolested to join the fight against the Red Army, slowing the westward Soviet advance. whatever London hopes for, in September on the Peloponnese, a power vacuum does arise when German forces pull out before General Scobie's forces are in place. The result is a mini-civil war between ELAS and the collaborationist security battalions. After an announcement by the British and the Greek government in exile, these battalionists have been surrendering through September without incident to the Red Cross or to ELAS. In October, 4,200 of them will do the same in Athens. But things take a darker turn at the town of Meligalas. After taking the city in a battle from September 13th to 15th, ELAS stand back and allow civilians from the surrounding area to launch a brutal, vengeful massacre against a group of surrendered battalionists. Later, ELAS goes further and set up a drumhead court-martial which condemns many more to death. Many of those killed are not actually security men themselves, but relatives or even people completely uninvolved. The final death toll is unclear, but the Red Cross estimates over 1,000 victims, most fighting-age men, but also a handful of women, elderly, and some adolescent boys and girls. News of the fighting on the Peloponnese deepens British concern about what ELAS might do if Scobie's force cannot secure Athens first. But in fact, because of the lack of Soviet support, EM have decided that they will not embark on a violent seizure of the Greek capital. Instead, at the Caserta conference on September 26, they, along with EDES, agreed to place themselves under the leadership of the Greek government in exile and under the command of Scobie. But while ELAS and EDES signed the Caserta agreement, EDES foot soldiers are undertaking a campaign of ethnic cleansing back in Greece. On September 23rd, EDES begins an assault on the region of Epirus. When they take over the town of Philiates, a few kilometers from the Greco-Albanian border, they capture about 100 men. After a brief court-martial, all 100 are executed. Now, these men aren't Germans. They've already withdrawn. They aren't ELAS men either. In fact, these are some Albanians, Muslims who have been living in the region since the days of the Ottoman Empire. The story of the Tsam is extremely complex, but to give you the very short version, under the authoritarian pre-war Greek government of Ioannis Metaxas, the Tsam Albanians were marginalized. They were subject to property confiscations, arbitrary arrests, and forbidden from speaking Albanian in public and private. It is perhaps unsurprising, therefore, that large part of the Tsam community welcomed the German and Italian occupiers, especially as both Axis powers promised the Tsam some sort of autonomy or union within a future Albanian state. Some took things further, and some militia groups participated in anti-partisan sweeps through ethnically Greek towns and villages alongside Axis forces. As so often, these involved wanton looting, murder, rape, and the burning of villages. The perpetrators also took the opportunity to seize Greek land and property. Now, with the Germans gone, EDES fighters and enraged Greek civilians take revenge. An orgy of murder, violence, rape, and the burning of homes and mosques take place over the last week of September. Many Tsam have already fled to Albania, and by the first week of October, most of those who remain in Epirus will have followed. The expulsion will continue into next year, by which point somewhere between 14,000 and 30,000 people, the entire Muslim Tsam population, will have been forced out of Greece. For most Greeks, though, October is a time for celebration, as the German withdrawal continues and the Caserta agreement holds, for now. On October 11th, the German commander in South Greece, Helmut Felmi, declares Athens an open city. In the country beyond the capital, from October 3rd to October 28th, Army Group E destroy infrastructure, including road and railway bridges, tunnels and railway stations, and hundreds of railway wagons and locomotives. Nevertheless, for the Athenians, it's a time of celebration. On the warm autumn morning of October 12th, the Germans lower the swastika flag from the Acropolis and the last soldiers leave the capital. Church bells ring with joy as crowds of hundreds of thousands fill the streets. Children clamber on the roofs of trams. There are chants of "Christ is risen," and blue and white Greek flags wave in celebration. But peace in Athens is short-lived. Prime Minister Papandreou returns on October 18th to take up government, and that very day there are signs of tensions. After an emotional flag-raising ceremony with General Scobie and the singing of the national anthem at the Acropolis, Papandreou is heckled by pro-EM elements in the crowd. Papandreou's new government is hardly in a comfortable position. By the end of the month, he nominally has control over the whole country, with Bulgaria evacuating from Eastern Macedonia and Thrace on October 28th. But in reality, ELAS has de facto control of most of Greece except Epirus and Corfu that are under EDES control. German forces remain on the island of Milos and at Chania in Crete, where a garrison of 12,000 troops observe an unofficial ceasefire with the Allies. Civil war is avoided on the island because ELAS and a resistance group called the National Organization of Crete are also observing a truce. So, relative stability has returned to Greek cities, and surviving Jewish Greeks begin returning to their homes to rebuild their lives. Of a pre-war Jewish population of 70 to 80,000, around 50 to 60,000 have been murdered in the Holocaust, most in Auschwitz, with the last deportations as recently as August. At over 80%, the Jewish population of Greece has suffered one of the highest murder rates in the whole of Nazi-controlled Europe. Many of the 10,000 or so survivors received aid from other Greek citizens and from the Greek Orthodox Church. But now that the war is over, their struggle is by no means finished. Most have had their homes, businesses, and property confiscated, stolen, or looted, and the new occupiers aren't about to hand them back. The Greek government does pass a law in November for the return of Jewish property, but more often than not this is ignored. In Salonika, for example, less than 15% of Jewish property is returned. Many of the survivors will see no future for themselves in Greece and look abroad to the United States, Canada, Australia, and the prospect of a Jewish homeland in mandatory Palestine. But that's a story for another episode. But for now, any hopes of peace in Greece are to be short-lived. It's only a matter of weeks before the conflict between ELAS and the Papandreou government bursts into the open. The main bone of contention is the demand that the Greek government purge a police force and gendarmerie that they claim is full of collaborators. Their government knows that it's not a baseless claim, and the security forces do need reform, but Papandreou wants this done gradually to avoid chaos. The government does announce the formation of a new force, the National Guard, but this is equally unacceptable to EM because the Guard is to be formed and led by officers from the political right, including former members of the security battalions. On top of this, the government announces that all guerrilla armies must be demobilized and surrender their arms. General Scobie meets the leaders of ELAS and EDES, Stefanos Serafis and Napoleon Servas, in Athens on November 22nd to discuss this demobilization process. Servas signals his willingness to disband EDES, but Serafis demurs. Over the next few days, that demurral hardens to a total refusal to disband ELAS. In fact, as Indy mentioned in the regular series, the ELAS Central Committee is reinstated by the end of the month. Churchill urges the Greek government not to give in to ELAS. Scobie and the Greeks set a deadline of December 10th for the demobilization. But even before this deadline, the EM ministers resigned their government positions on December 2nd and called for mass demonstrations the next day at Constitution Square in Athens, to be followed by a general strike. Papandreou must accept their demands or resign. The Prime Minister does not back down. He bans the demonstrations and blocks access to the square. But ELAS are well organized, and they lay on a bus service to ferry their supporters into the city. The weak and demoralized police guarding the square crumble under the weight of the 200,000-strong opposition. When several hundred people break through the cordons, the police open fire and leave at least 28 dead. The police are then forced to retreat as an enraged mob storms the square. Order is only restored in the afternoon when British paratroopers clear the demonstrators from the square without further bloodshed. In the aftermath of the violence in Athens, Papandreou does consider resigning. The Americans support this decision, but Churchill will hear none of it. Churchill urges British Ambassador Reginald Leeper to hold Papandreou to his duty. As ELAS launches assaults on police stations in the suburbs and Greece stares down the barrel of civil war, Churchill sends out a fateful order to General Scobie on December 5th. You are responsible for maintaining order in Athens and for neutralizing or destroying all ELAS bands approaching the city. You may make any regulations you like for the strict control of the streets or for the rounding up of any number of truculent persons. Naturally, ELAS will try to put women and children in the van where shooting may occur. You must be clever about this and avoid mistakes. But do not hesitate to fire at any armed male in Athens who assails the British authority or Greek authority with which we are working. It would be well, of course, if your commands were reinforced by the authority of some Greek government and Papandreou is being told by Leeper to stop and help. Do not, however, hesitate to act as if you were in a conquered city where a local rebellion is in progress. Scobie gave ELAS until midnight on December 6th to withdraw its forces from the Athens-Piraeus area. ELAS refuse and are strengthened by 2,000 extra fighters arriving from the Peloponnese. They continue attacking government buildings and police stations in Athens, and by December 11th, the British are confined to the center of the city. The port of Piraeus has been lost, the airfield at Tatoi too, and the airfield at Kalamaki is under siege. Outnumbered by the enemy, the British fly in reinforcements over from Italy. Scobie soon has about 40,000 troops, a number which will double by the end of December. As the fighting rages in Athens, ELAS also launch a campaign to finally destroy EDES. A force of 12,000 ELAS fighters advance on EDES-controlled Epirus on December 18th. EDES are on the back foot from the start. Tservas has just 8,000 or so men, and he's already beginning the demobilization process set out by the Greek government. ELAS soon overrun the towns of Arta and Ioannina, and the Royal Navy evacuates the remaining EDES troops, hundreds of civilians and Tservas himself, to Corfu at the end of the month. But this fight against EDES diverts manpower from Athens, and ELAS soon realize that they cannot defeat the British there. Indeed, the British are pushing ELAS back with artillery, armor, and air power. As ELAS retreats from Athens and the surrounding Attica region, they leave behind the victims of mass executions and take around 30,000 or so hostages, 4,000 of whom will die in their custody. ELAS may have retreated from Athens, but they remain the dominant force in the rest of the country. That is, until a renewed British offensive in January weakens ELAS to the point that they have no choice but to accept a truce on the 15th. The brief conflict known as the December Events, or Decembriana, costs 5,000 ELAS lives. The British lose about 110 killed and 1,190 wounded. After the fighting ends, it looks like there might be an opportunity for compromise. ELAS do get some of the things they've been asking for in the resulting political settlement. Papandreou resigns already in December, and with Republican sentiment running high, the British put pressure on George II to step down and appoint Archbishop Damaskinos as a temporary regent. At the Treaty of Arkitsa, signed on February 12, 1945, ELAS agrees to disband immediately in return for an amnesty for all political crimes and a plebiscite to be held on constitutional issues and the monarchy later in the year. But any hopes that this treaty will see a return to stability are short-lived. Despite the promise of amnesty, the Greek government will continue to persecute EAM and ELAS members for supposedly non-political crimes. The National Guard, right-wing paramilitary forces, and former members of the security battalions will launch a violent campaign against their leftist enemies known as the White Terror. There will be over 1,000 murders and tens of thousands of cases of arrest, torture, and kidnap. In response, former members of EAM, ELAS, and communists will dig up their caches of weapons and fight back. After the victory of the Nationalist Coalition in the 1946 election and King George's victory in the referendum, the country will enter a full-scale civil war. nationalists, royalists, and Western allies on one side and Greek communists on the other. Over 150,000 will perish in 3.5 years of fighting. I said that this Greek civil war will be one of the first conflicts within the Cold War, and it will be. But it doesn't quite play out how you might expect. Yes, the British and the Americans will support the nationalists, but unlike so many of these conflicts still to come, the West won't be facing off against a Moscow-backed communist insurgency. True to his agreement with Churchill, and as punishment for the independent-minded Josip Tito's support for the Greek communists, Stalin will provide only limited support. On the whole, he will sit back and leave his fellow communists to be liquidated. This is the true nature of this war, the one to come, and perhaps all wars. They are games on a chessboard where the hopeful man or woman taking up arms is nothing more than a pawn to be sacrificed for some misguided, flawed, or even terrible idea of a greater good, an idea based in the utilitarian argument that one's suffering is redeemed if the cause is right. That deaths are statistics on a scoreboard in a game these pawns have no understanding of. It is based on an idea of expendability of human life, sold to those who must die as righteousness, glory, and honor. A lie so vapid, it can only be sold either through indoctrination and manipulation or with the force of laws and arms. There is no honor in death, there is no glory in dying, and to be dead is not righteous, not even on the battlefield. There, it is only a premature end to life under ignoble circumstances and an insufferable lifelong loss for the bereft. Never forget.